Hello and welcome to this ONUG Fall 2023 open session from Gluware. It's titled Rapid Multi-Vendor CLI and API Automation and Integrations. I'm Michael Howe, VP of Product Marketing. Let's get into it. So this is really a demo-heavy session. We want to get right into the UI and show you what we're able to do for you. But the whole setup is how do we accelerate hyper-automation? And we're going to show you how we do that using the Gluware Intelligent Network Automation. That's going to be made up of a three-part demonstration. First, just showing what it takes to automate multi-vendor via CLI and API and the Gluware approach to that. So to demonstrate that, we'll be highlighting multi-vendor setups, including a Cisco CLI-based route switch, Cisco's Meraki and ACI. We'll touch on vendors like Versa and Juniper and Arista. In demo number 2, we're going to focus on another pain point in the industry, which is around performing audits. Those are generally kind of configuration audit centric, but we're going to show you some new advancements in Gluware where you can even automate operational state. Into demo number 3, we're going to demonstrate how Gluware Network RPA, which is our process automation, can very easily be integrated with third-party solutions to provide event-driven capabilities. And we're going to highlight a monitoring use case where a monitoring product discovers something and then wants to trigger, or based on that event, trigger the Gluware workflow, which is then going to perform an automated action. So with that, let's get into demo number 1. Well, before we get into demo number 1, let's just set up the pain point a little bit more. Gluware being an automation and orchestration company, when we sit down and work with large enterprise, we often kind of start with a picture like this and start asking questions. Because generally, when we talk to, again, these large enterprise, they don't have one challenge, they have many challenges. And that starts with the network layer. So if you look at where the Gluware is southbound, the so-called infrastructure, that infrastructure is made up of multiple domains and is certainly multi-vendor in the majority of organizations. So if you even look at 3 domains such as the WAN, the data center, and the campus, that in and of itself adds a lot of complexity. There's generally even multiple vendors in those alone. Then as you then look at adopting other technologies like in your data center and your campus, let's say you start using Cisco ACI. Well, that's API driven, right? So now you have a controller, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can fully automate it through the controller. Similar for the campus. Maybe you're deploying Versa or you're deploying Cisco Meraki. It may introduce a controller, but it is another set of technologies. It's another skill set. And again, it's something that may or may not, have native automation within the platform. So Gluware generally is kind of providing broad-based automation of many forms across that multi-vendor, multi-domain inventory. And just to touch on that a little bit more, automation can come in many forms. Some of the things we'll touch on today in our short demos are around the inventory, performing config drift monitoring, auditing configurations and state, automating assessments and troubleshooting, of course, configuration management, and process automation. When we talk about process automation, it often involves this top stack, the top bar of the stack here, which is called management and monitoring. You have ITSMs and CMDBs and other systems that have a role in the network management, like ServiceNow for your service management. You're going to have potentially monitoring and observability type companies doing S&MP monitoring. You have logging. And when you really look at end-to-end workflow automation, you're going to have to tie in these products. And so we're going to get into that as well. Now, when you look at, again, back at the automation orchestration, the middle plane here where Gluware exists, you see 2 other icons in there with Ansible and StackStorm. Those aren't going to be part of the demo today, but I just wanted to highlight that Gluware is an automation and orchestration platform. We can orchestrate things like Ansible playbooks or onboard StackStorm packs and execute StackStorm tasks as well. So that's really just an extension of the automation for various purposes and use cases. So with that kind of overview, let's move on into demo number 1. For demo number 1, we are going to focus on the infrastructure layer and the challenges and benefit you get by automating that infrastructure layer with a product like Gluware. So as I talked to already, you're going to have different vendors and we're going to start to explore different vendors that exist in these clouds, like Cisco and Juniper and Route Switch, and maybe Cisco ACI and Arista and Data Center, and Meraki and Versa and your campus and your access networks, and many others as well. Many of these vendors are still CLI based, but quite a few of them are now API based. And onboarding or interacting with an API is not really a one process or one size fits all. In the case of Gluware, when we automate the infrastructure layer, we onboard these APIs in a tight integration. So we actually spend, weeks to months developing these integrations, and we tightly integrate it with our application suite. Again, that gives you inventory and drift and audit and config management and more. So when you're using Gluware, you have a unified experience across a network layer that's different vendors and even different technologies being CLI and API based. So with that introduction, let's get into the UI and show you this in action. So here we are in the Gluware UI. And I'll just point that the Gluware user interface runs from a web browser. You hit your remote Gluware instance, in this case, via this IP. You sign in, and then you navigate into your various organization that you're going to be automating. In this case, I have this particular org, and in this org, which happens to be a test lab, but I wanted to kind of give you a flyby of what it means to automate with Gluware. So one of the first things you're going to notice here is we're in an app called Device Manager. It's one of the starting points with Gluware, but if I hit my nav bar, you can see where I can access the different applications to automate the infrastructure. So just looking at Device Explorer here already, let's organize it by vendor here. And I can see I have quite a few vendors in this example lab network that I'm working with. I have A10 and Checkpoint, a bunch of Cisco, F5, HP, Juniper, Palo Alto, Radware, Riverbed. So, I have a nice subset of the over 40 operating systems that Gluware supports. So where does automation begin? Well, it starts in this app where you can perform a network discovery. And then in addition to the network discovery, Gluware performs a device discovery. So in the case of all of these, Gluware has the ability to connect to these systems and interrogate them and pull out information like the IP address, the host name, the OS version, the serial number, the SKU. So we have this information in our database, and you've started with one of the first critical steps of automation is understanding what you have in your network. If I click into any one of these devices, I'm going to see how I'm connecting to it. And this is, in this particular lab, these are all CLI-based devices. So I have my IP, and then I point to my credential manager, and I tell it which credential to use. So we won't go deeply into that, but so that's how we're connecting. When we do our initial discovery and when we do our regular discovery, we're also grabbing a config snapshot. So for all the devices that we're talking to, we're grabbing the configuration. And this is going to tie into the audit and drift monitoring conversation, because we've really expanded what we're collecting, and you can even customize it. So let's say you want to capture your show IP interface brief, or you want to capture something, a Gluware construct called a concept item, which in this case is like a configuration element. You can capture those things as well. And then standard is which is just capturing the running config. So you can use that running config, and that's again leveraged in Drift and Audit. So a lot to dive into here, but we'll just move on by doing just that, by navigating into Drift and Audit, and just showcasing how once you have a snapshot of those items you're collecting, you can start to perform diff analysis. So if I have these devices that have a diff, a change, I can navigate in and I can start to execute comparisons of before and after. So did my configuration change? Did my operational state change? So in this case, I can see nothing changed here. You're going to go through and see the diff again of anything you're collecting, which generally starts with your configuration, but it can be expanded to much more. Similarly, you have the ability to navigate into the audit side of the app and do extensive audits. So let's move on into the final part I wanted to just quickly show you here. Well, you can OS manage for operating system management upgrades. We're not going to include that today. But if I navigate into my config model editor, into my node view, I did want to quickly touch on how we automate configuration. So Gluware has the ability through intelligent model discovery to ingest configuration and turn it into configuration management or policy. And so in this case, I've started with a router where I've ingested the configuration of it, and I've broken it down into AAA and banner and DNS and NTP. And so you can see here that I have these features here, and then I can even look at the CLI level, which is to say, what is the AAA policy, or what is the DNS configuration, or what is the NTP configuration? And this is where I can use Gluware to standardize my policies and then implement config changes down to the devices. And so this is, let's say, we have several forms of automation. These happen to be at a fairly lower level, which is at the CLI level, but you can certainly create abstractions as well. So that now you've seen a taste of this, how Gluware is with CLI-based devices in this org. I'm going to switch over to another org, and I want to show you that perspective now using an API-based device. So let me go back to Device Manager. And for this view, I do want my Meraki network in view. So this particular org, which is Meraki Network Demo, is pointed at my Meraki cloud service, which leverages api.meraki.com. So how am I connecting to it? So I have my connection method, which is the Meraki API, and I'm passing my API credentials. So that's how I'm connecting to it via my credentials, and that what I'm hitting, I'm able to discover my Meraki devices, and I can see I have several Meraki networks and these particular devices. So if I navigate over to my Meraki org on the Meraki side on dashboard.meraki.com, I see these same devices are here because all I've done is hit it with the API, and I've done numerous API calls to ingest that data. So I think that's one thing you want to think about, or just to bring perspective around APIs, is that if you go look at a vendor's API documentation, I'll just bring up Gluware's just for a reference. You're going to look at it and you're going to see commands and what's in the payload, and it's pretty low-level integration when you consume a vendor's published API. When you integrate an API, like we've done with Gluware here, you don't necessarily have to get into that low level of the API calls and exactly what calls and what response and data management. We're doing all that for you in a tight integration so that you can automate in this case, Meraki. So here's where we have the inventory. Similarly with Meraki, you can navigate into Drift and Audit, and you can see if drift has occurred. In this case, drift hasn't occurred, and I can audit the configurations. Let me just go ahead and bring up one of the configurations here in the view so you can see it. I'll just navigate to just the config view, and you're going to see the view here. If I click on standard here, and what you see here is what we call dot notation. It basically kind of flattens the JSON structure, so it's very human readable. But you're going to see all the network, org, and device level parameters inside this device. I can also flip this view to JSON. So for some reason you're more comfortable looking at it in the JSON view, you can do that as well. And of course, these are downloadable. But these, by extracting these from the controller, we get all of the configurations on a per device level on the Meraki side. And then as I navigate into Network RPA, as I navigate into my config model editor, and I've selected my Meraki instance here, here is where I can automate org level parameters, network level parameters, and device level parameters. For example, here's the Meraki switch virtual interface where I can configure the VLANs that are part of that interface, and I can click in and I have the forms here. So what this is going to help you with is inside of the Meraki UI, let's say I wanted to make a change on a per network basis, I would have to navigate into the networks, or I would have to, let's say I wanted to make a change at the switch level or at the VLAN level, I have to navigate in the tree into those policies on a per device basis. So it's a lot of pointing and clicking. With Gluware, you can make changes across orgs, across networks, and multiple devices, orgs, networks, and devices. So again, just the goal is simplifying or bringing automation on top of the Meraki interface via third-party automation. Let's go to the last demo here to highlight. And I'm going to start with an org. I'm in a particular org here, which is another lab we have at Gluware. And in this org, I have a bunch of other vendors. So let's organize it by vendor again here. And I can see A10, Arista, Checkpoint, a bunch of Cisco, HPE, Juniper, Versa. Okay, so just as an example or as a comparison, as I switch a vendor, let's say I look at Arista, when I double click on this device, where it's the same over and over again, where we give it credentials. So we're connecting to this IP using our Arista administrative credentials. We connect to it, and we're able to capture the configuration, and we're able to use this config for drift, auditing, configuration management. So it's really the same thing and same experience. So what this really brings your operational users is they don't have to be as strong on a per domain basis or per vendor. You can begin to do things in Gluware where you're automating these things more in a uniform manner, and you don't have to kind of swivel chair and go from different tools or even different CLIs to go and do this stuff manually or use different vendor tools. So that's a quick look at Arista. Here's another new vendor we recently onboarded is Versa. Now Versa has controller, and they also have devices that support CLI. We've onboarded the CLI, so for this Versa device, we're connecting to it via CLI, and we're able to capture the configuration, use it for config, drift, audit, and again, perform automation with Gluware for that. So very complementary and helps you with that as you're expanding vendors or acquiring a company and then having to take on another management system. It really helps. So let's do a quick filter here and bring the focus to Cisco ACI. So with Cisco ACI, again, now we're talking about an API-based controller technology. So with each API we onboard, we generally have to add a new connection method because each of them have just slightly different standards and authentication types and sometimes different formatting. So we onboard the connection and pass credentials. And again, same experience in that now through API call, we collect all of that data from the device, in this case, the controller, and we can inventory it. So this particular system, not only can we pull the entire configuration via API, but we're also discovering the leaf and spine nodes it is controlling. So if I navigate to my APIC controller and just log in, you're going to see here, I have the 2 leaves and 2 spines. It's just a small ACI system, but Gluware is able to speak via API to that controller, discover the same system, perform drift and audit. And then if we navigate into the config model editor, this is where you can see that, Gluware's focus in terms of the modeling that we've built for Cisco ACI is largely around tenant management. So ACI is a fairly complex technology. It has a lot of interdependent configurations, let's say, related to the tenant. And you can see that here, if I select tenant 3, the tenant, and I'll just click on this, is made up of the VRF, the bridge domains that are part of it, the application profiles. So there's a lot of constructs here that make up the tenant. And Gluware can sync and pull in the current configuration and then enable those day 2 changes, adding tenants, adding bridge domains, adding app profiles, removing them. So you can automate those things, from an end-to-end basis. So in conclusion of this demo, again, Gluware's real strength is bringing kind of a unified experience to managing your infrastructure layer across numerous operating systems, CLI and API, and providing multiple forms of automation across inventory, drift, audit, config manage, and process automation. In this next demo, we're going to take a look at the pain point of auditing your network infrastructure. It is generally one of the top items that when we talk to enterprise IT teams around pain points, that they have external regulators or internal compliance that they have to comply with, and executing those audits and the fear of failing an audit or not being compliant can be a real pain point across many different regulations and standards bodies like HIPAA, SOX, Center for Internet Security, PCI DSS, and more. So what we're going to take a look at is how can you easily build these audits in Gluware and highlight some new capabilities that we've introduced, allowing you to specify CLI and API commands and even audit operational state. So let's take a look in the user interface. So here we are back in the Gluware user interface, and we're going to take a look at this use case around audits. So for that purpose, we're going to navigate into the Drift and Audit application using the left-hand nav, and let's go into the devices view. So from the devices view, I can see here that I do expose a drift detection field. We're not going to cover drift right now, but let's dive into audit. So with audits, usually customers put in their system a bunch of the pre-built audits that Gluware provides that are based on industry standards. So if I look at my Policy Explorer, I have one of those example audits loaded. This is the Center for Internet Security Audit for Cisco's NX OS operating system. So I'll double click on that. And with that, I'll open up the browser of that policy and go into edit. So what you're going to see when you build a Gluware audit or you're browsing one like this that's already created, you have your name and description and permission level, then the audits are made up of rules. In this case, this particular audit is auditing a bunch of configuration parameters that align with what the CIS recommends. And so just for reference, I'll just navigate over to the CIS website here. You can navigate into the CIS benchmarks and download and look at all these rules. So here's your kind of paper process, and Gluware creates all of that in an easy to use audit. And then you can enable or disable the rules you're checking. For example, if you scroll down here, there are rules related to EIGRP and BGP and OSPF, like routing protocols that aren't turned on in this particular environment, so that you wouldn't have to audit for those. But just to take a look a little bit deeper into this, is that when you build an audit rule, and I'll just navigate into like, for example, SNMP statements here. So if we navigate into the rule, it is going to be looking at what we've defined. So you must have this SNMP server global enforced privilege statement, and you must have the user with authentication SHA enabled. So if you look at that, that is the description from the spec is telling you what you must do. And then it has example configurations. So it's looking in the configuration for those parameters. So again, can't go too deep into this because of time, but basically you have a pretty in-depth audit here for the CIS's recommended configuration. So what you're able to do is, back at my device level, I can select a given device like a Cisco NXOS device here and execute an audit. And I'm going to select that policy, start the audit. The audit's going to run. And, again, most of our customers are going to set this up where they're auditing on a regular basis. Some of them do it daily or nightly. Some are doing it like, let's say, monthly or quarterly. But you certainly want to audit regularly to stay on top of config changes. So I can say one device ran, the device is in violation, and of all those audit rules, it has 161 violations. So if I was intending to be compliant, I would have a lot of items to go in and correct here. So if I just browse into this particular audit. I can see my 161. So this audit's been run twice with the same results. And I can come in and see various things about how my audit ran. So here are all the rules, and I can even see, what right back into it. So all of that is saved, and you can see, what failed and passed and your full details of your audit. So that's kind of what you do when you're using an audit that's you're running regularly or pre-built. You can go in and do all those verifications. But where Gluware has extended this functionality is this is auditing the captured config file. But what if I want to have more information? So in settings, in my organizational settings, Gluware allows you to customize the discovery and capture on a per OS basis. And you can even have multiple capture command sets. So let's just see, the example I was working with here, in addition to NXOS, was the iOS command set. So if I edit this one here, you can tick or untick this box, which is run the standard commands. The standard commands capture the config. But so in addition to that, I can run additional commands, like any show commands I want to capture. And we can tie it to concept items, which are a Gluware construct. But when Gluware models your configuration, we do it on a per item basis like this, so very modular, and you can do it that way as well. And so it pairs well when you're automating those features with Gluware. If those features go out of policy, you can then remediate them directly back to in policy. But just to show you quickly, you're able to customize the commands we're running when we execute the capture. This includes show commands, and then you have the ability to custom implement the redactions as well. So if you don't want to, let's say, generate a false positive by data that's changing, like a timestamp, or there's spacing that changes, you can redact out that to try to get a clean comparison for something like drift. So that's how you edit it. So it's back. Let's get back into Drift and Audit, and in my device view here, when you run those additional commands, like I have run on the Cisco iOS devices, you're going to see those additional captures. So every time this runs, it's going to execute, and I have a drop down with all the historical captures. So this is really nice in that you want to say, well, was that interface up, last month? If you have that historical capture, you can navigate back to it. Also, so this is, and then you can drift it as well. So if you wanted to compare, like let's navigate the. You could compare these the captures and see if something changed. In this case, nothing changed, but you can compare that. So if you're using concept items, the concept format looks like this. This comes from our data model, but then this is the parameter. So this is the parameter it's going to be checking, and then you have your standard comparison. So with a standard comparison, here's my golden config and my current config. And they're pretty much in sync. So that's a quick demo of how you can build audits and execute audits, and then expand Gluware's capability to also collect operational state and other information, CLI or API. And then with this data, you can drift the data sets and you can audit the data sets as well. In this next demo, we're going to focus on API integrations with third-party systems. So in previous ONUG events, we've done demonstrations using Microsoft Sentinel and Kentech and others, where those systems they can detect something, like Azure was detecting a security challenge, and Kentech is monitoring the network and looking at an application problem, but they have no ability to take action on the network. So how can you enable event-driven automation? Well, the way that we're proposing you do it is you do API integrations with these third-party systems in Gluware. Now, when you say that, that sounds like a big challenge, like APIs are complicated, you need programming skill sets. We're going to show you a way that Gluware has exposed leveraging our network RPA application and our ability to build a no-code workflow. So you drag and drop and you build the actions that you want to automate in terms of response. And then you can very elegantly integrate variables that are then auto-built into an API call that you can pass in variables from these external systems. And then you can literally copy and paste the API call and the payload, which would include how to pass the variables right into those systems. So I would say even, network operations folks with no programming skill sets, once shown this and within a short training session, would be able to start leveraging this technology, integrating third-party systems with Gluware, and providing event-driven automation for many use cases. So let's take a look in the user interface. Okay, so here we are in the Gluware user interface, and we're going to navigate into Network RPA for this demonstration. Network RPA is Gluware's no-code process automation technology that can automate all of the application suites that we support, as well as third-party integrations. So just to make this quick and to the point, I have a workflow. I'm in my workflow library here, and I have a workflow that I built that is building off a previous demonstration that we did with Kentech, an observability solution. So let's go ahead and edit the workflow so you can see how this is built and what it does. So again, Network RPA provides this drag and drop canvas where I can drag and drop tasks over into the canvas and work out exactly what automated action I want to take. In the use case here, Kentech is going to be determining that there is a application degraded performance, let's say with Zoom or something, and they want to see if the network is the problem. So one of the ways in which Gluware can help deduce if the network is the problem is to understand if any config has changed. And for example, you could even audit. In a previous demo, we demonstrated audit. You could do things like drift or audit. And if your configuration has drifted away from the approved normal, or let's say you fail an audit, you could auto remediate. So in this step, the provision is going to auto remediate if it meets the if I look at if config drifted in this case, you know it's going to proceed here. If it's a yes, it's going to proceed here. So you can see that the basic, let's say, action I want to take, or event-driven action, if the third-party system is determining an app challenge. Now, the key new thing what we want to show you in this demo is, well, I don't want my entire network triggered. I want to pass in a variable so Gluware focuses on a key area of the network. So what I've done for this example is I've built a variable called site, because Gluware has sites, and we have a group of devices that are in a site. And so for this particular technology to work in terms of integration, we have a new reserved variable type called start. It's called start object, or start obj for short. And that indicates that it is a variable that is going to be passed into the workflow. So I have start ob.site as my variable. So this variable has been created. Now on my filter targets, which tells Gluware what devices to use in the workflow, I'm going to match the site name equal to the start object of the variable site being passed in. So this is how I create the variable, and I tie it to this task. And now when I go back to my workflow activity view, where I would kick off this workflow, actually my workflow library, not my activity, here I can navigate into view workflow, sorry. So here from workflow library, I can navigate into view info. View info is going to give me the exact URL, the method, and the payload. I can look at this in JSON form. This is the exact URL and payload that you have to integrate in your external system. So with the example of Kentech, they have an event that says if they hit a certain threshold, make this API call. Well, instead of having to consume an API document and try to understand how APIs work, all you have to do is this is the API call. You copy and paste it directly into your system. And this is the payload, and you can pass in the site variable here, and you're off and running. So this is really powerful. I know it gets a little bit deep here, but this concept of very lightweight API integration for things like event-driven automation is a really powerful concept to execute that. So another benefit of building these, what we call input parameters, is that this workflow is sitting here and it can be fired off with that API call that passes in the variable. But we also have the ability to run it right through the UI. If we do that here and execute it, what it's going to do is say, oh, we don't have that input variable. It didn't get passed in via an API. So I'm going to type in the site code, which is NYC for New York, and hit continue. And that will enable me to fire off that workflow right through the UI. So you can, again, when you build these input parameters, you can use them via external API call, which is really, if we had the full demo environment with Kentech, we could show you that, or any third-party system making an API call to Gluware. Without that API to kick it off, we can also run it manually and pass in the variable through a form fill and kick it off. So as it's running, what I want to just quickly show you is in the targets, I'll show you the tasks view here. In the tasks, we passed in our initial set of devices in this demo network, which is 20. But once we ran the site filter, it focused on those 5 devices that are in the New York City site. And now it's executing the comparison and will execute through the rest of the workflow. Okay, so 2 minutes and 18 seconds, I can see this workflow completed, and I can take a look at all the results from the information side, the targets, the tasks. But I do see all the tasks completed and the workflow was completed successfully. I also can bring in one more view here, just to show that that an email was fired off as well as part of that workflow to let me know that with these devices, drift was detected and remediated. So thanks again for your time and interest in Gluware. If you are on the Hopin platform attending ONUG Live, please go to our virtual booth and connect with our team if you have any questions. Also, go to gluware.com, and from there you can request a demo, and you can even take a test drive to get set up on a virtual system and kick the tires on Gluware yourself. Again, thanks for attending our ONUG open session.